Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear. We have David Oates and Jay Wilder with us from reversespeech.weebly.com. Now, we're going to dive deep into the analysis of reverse speech. I have been studying this off and on now for about 10 years. I used to get into it pretty deep. I'm sure most of you have heard Stairway to Heaven backwards and also some of the Beatles songs. So we're going to find out what it really means and if it's actually legit. So thank you so much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. How the heck are you guys?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Rex.
Absolutely. And the audio is so much better now. Now let's get into this. We'll just dive right in. Why is reverse speech so important, and why does it work?
Oh, right. Let's dive right in. Okay, well, reverse speech is so important because it gives us direct access to the unconscious. The human psyche is comprised of many different layers, consciousness being only the top 5% of the human psyche. 95% of the mind is virtually unconscious and largely unexplored. What reverse speech is, it is this unexplored region of the unconscious speaking, and it is speaking constantly, and it's speaking in reverse. And if you take speech and run it backwards about once every 20, 30 seconds, you can hear these very clear phrases amongst the gibberish. I'll be playing examples as this show continues. That is the voice of the unconscious. So it's important, very important, because other than hypnosis, we have not yet had a reliable access into the unconscious mind. We've fiddled around with NLP, other modalities, attempt to access the unconscious, but this is the first real direct communication with the unconscious that has been established in normal, straightforward words and English to understand. So that's why it's so important, and it can teach us about who we are, why we create the things that we create, why we have the behavioural patterns we have, what causes us to live in the world in which we live. All of these secrets are contained within the unconscious. So what it actually is a dual-fold form of human communication. My theory is that language is bi-level, forwards as well as backwards. And as the brain is constructing the sounds of speech, it's putting those sounds together in such a way that we're saying two things at once. One forwards from the conscious and the other one in reverse from the unconscious. So it's a natural form of language. It's been surrounded with suspicion and superstition for decades. You know, religious fundamentalists called it the voice of Satan. And, it's had all sorts of interesting history over the years, but it's essentially another form of communication, the unconscious mind speaking. That's why it's so important.
Now, is it true that the subconscious mind actually picks things up in reverse first?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is. Yes, a reverse speech generally precedes forward speech. You'll often hear things in reverse, spoken in reverse before they're spoken forward. So, the unconscious is a step ahead of the conscious. And yes, does that answer your question? Yeah.
It does. And I know people that have actually studied that type where they will actually take something and then they'll reverse it and play it over and over and over again to kind of manifest something a little bit quicker. So that stuff's also been done previously, right? I mean, they've been practicing that type of mantra for thousands of years. So it's not like it's something that was just discovered, right?
Well, reverse speech. Oh, well, reverse speech itself has only just been discovered. Well, it really began with backward messages in rock and roll. The Beatles were really the first pioneers of this. They developed a recording technique called backward masking, where they superimposed messages backwards onto their records that hinted Paul McCartney had died. And then people started playing Beatles records backwards, trying to find these messages, and they found other messages there that the Beatles hadn't put there deliberately. So there was this big controversy. Well, how was this getting there? And then the musicians were denying, well, we didn't put it there. And then the fundamentalists got on the bandwagon and said, well, Satan's doing it. And then that's when I started my work. And this is before anyone ever found it in speech. And that's when I started my work in '83. I heard about the back message in rock and roll and actually got a track of Stairway to Heaven out, played it backwards, and was quite stunned to hear the phrase. And, oh, gee, that is there. Wow, what on earth is this? And so that's how my work started. And then I discovered in speech. Up until my work, I'm not aware of anyone else who's done any work with speech itself. And so I really founded the field and wrote the theories and, taking it forward.
That's really cool. And if we could jump to Stairway to Heaven, because the specific location that song was written, and it was supposedly done via automatic writing, but I'm wondering if it's actually just backmasking, where they said, okay, let's come up with this really cool, something really spooky, so when they play it backwards. Do you think that was legit, or was that...
No, there's no way they could have orchestrated the song deliberately. No, it's an example of reverse speech. It's not backmasking. It's not deliberately put there. It's an example of reverse speech in music. So...
okay. So you think that was something that was actually done really via automatic writing, and that there was no backmasking to that?
Correct. Yes, I wouldn't use the phrase automatic writing, but maybe it was. I mean, he wrote it in Aleister Crowley's mansion, Bolkestein, in one afternoon. So it was certainly an inspired piece of music. There's no doubt about that. So who inspired it? I'll leave that up to your personal beliefs to work that one out. So, yeah.
That's kind of spooky, because when you play that song backwards, I mean, it does have the undertones of hell and Satan and all that kind of stuff, and whether you believe in religious dogma or not, it's definitely in that song.
Oh yeah. Well, see, the song it's actually quite interesting verse. I've actually studied. I've written a whole chapter in one of my books about Stairway to Heaven, and it's actually, when you look into the history, it's actually quite fascinating. The reversal. Let's see if I can pull it up real quick. And like, for example, it talks about a tool shed where he made people suffer, sad Satan. And there was a church built on Bolkestein, which Aleister Crowley owned, called the Tool House, and it burned to the ground, and everyone inside perished. So it has that whole interesting, and I can't find it at the top of my head. You'd think I'd have Stairway to Heaven right at the very top of my list, wouldn't you?
That's okay. No problem. It happens to the best of us. I threw a curveball out there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's got to be here under my music section, and I'm just I have quite an extensive music section, and
I can imagine.
I'd like
go ahead, Jay.
Say something about what Dave was talking about how the subconscious works, and my involvement, why I got involved with David, which is really new. It wasn't till January this year. A good friend of mine told me about David's work, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But I've been a student of what do you want to call it, metaphysics, or how is it that some people have a really extraordinary life, and how is it some people suffer and run into brick walls all the time? And I finally came to the realization that it really depends on what their subconscious believes. You've heard the expression, we only use 10% of our brain. Well, Mother Nature doesn't waste anything. That other 90% is being used, and that's the subconscious. So guess which part is going to really, create our life? It's that 90%. That's why affirmations by themselves don't really work. You can say, I'm wealthy, but unless your subconscious aligns with that, nothing's going to really happen. So anyway, that's where I was when I heard about reverse speech, and I decided to check it out. And David's just put together a package of 12 programs, MP3 files, and I got those. And they're called Meta Walks. And they're short. They're only like 8 minutes or so. And they had a really profound effect on my life in the sense that things changed. The results I was having in my life, and when I look at how they change, I think about how we learn to ride a bicycle. Say, we get on a bicycle and we fall off. We get on a bicycle and we fall off. At some point, we get on the bicycle and we can ride. And for the rest of our life, we'll be able to ride a bicycle, right? Well, that's because the subconscious learned how to ride a bicycle. So these meta walks, I learned, well, in my business, I learned some new things about being successful in business in a way that my business has completely changed. I'm making more money. I'm getting a whole different grade of clients coming in. It's like, whoa, how could this be? Which, to be honest, my conscious mind goes, this is too simple. This couldn't really be happening like this. But it's been my experience. So I got involved with David, and out of that, I decided I want to help him get this out in the world because, there's an expression, when the truth is told in a way it's believed, people will take action on it. And I really believe we're at a place in our history, humanity's history, where we really need to clean up our act. We need to clean up our subconscious. And this is one of the best tools, if not the best tool I've ever found. So I'm kind of inspired on a mission here for people to check it out for themselves and see if it works.
That's really cool. I mean, that's really cool. And do you think that it also kind of gives you more of a vision, like an outline of what you see yourself doing in the future?
Well, yeah, and it's not so much it gives it. It's like when I use my conscious mind to think about my future, different things come up that are just naturally there. It's kind of spooky in a sense because it's like, oh, I'm thinking really different about this. But it gets back into like riding a bicycle, It's like before you can ride a bicycle, you couldn't visualize yourself riding a bicycle. Once you can ride a bicycle, you can visualize yourself riding around the block, no problem. So the meta walks, David has a package of 12 of them that he sells very reasonably. They're only like $47 for all 12 of them, with different categories as success, just success in general, and business or your career, health, and I think relationship, if I remember correctly. So I've gone through all 12 of them. I've gone through them numerous times. I find myself, and David, this is a question I'd like for you to address. I find myself when I use them going so deep. I mean, it's like the most powerful. I meditate. I mean, sometimes if I meditate long enough, I'll get in a really deep state of consciousness. But I listen to these meta walks, and I get there in a matter of minutes. And so why is that, David? How is it that
well, that's the universal feedback I get from everyone. And I've had people say to me, look, I can't be hypnotized, and bang, no problems at all. It's because, well, let me see if I can give a quick, short answer to that question. It's because what I've discovered with reverse speech is how the unconscious mind communicates, how it thinks. And it thinks in a matrix of pictures or images or metaphor. And so the meta walks themselves use the actual language that the unconscious mind uses, which, I mean, it's taken me 20, 30 years to get to this stage of learning to understand how the unconscious thinks. So my whole premise when I first started my research was that if reverse speech is the voice of the unconscious, what can it teach me about the unconscious and how the unconscious thinks and functions? So the reason why it's so deep is that the inductions I use are using languages and images from the unconscious mind. So it's sort of like an analogy would be if you want to establish communication with a Russian, there's not much point talking to him in English, okay? And
right.
But you need to talk to him in Russian. And same with the unconscious. There's not much point talking to the unconscious in language it doesn't use. And the unconscious thinks differently. It uses different language. It uses different linguistic patterns. And so the meta walks have all been designed around what I've learned about how the unconscious thinks and processes. And that's why they're so deep, because they use language patterns that directly stimulate the unconscious. Does that make sense? Use the unconscious as own language.
Absolutely. Now, with that said, also, do you get people that reach out to you essentially and they say, okay, I want this to be achieved in my life, and you just have them say a few paragraphs essentially, and then you put an analysis together on it and give it back to them?
No. Now we're talking a different process altogether. The $47 12 MetaWalk package is really a generic package. Okay, it's going to generally help your business. It's going to generally help your relationships. But if you've got very specific problems and issues, like, I don't know, schizophrenia, I'm just working with a schizophrenic patient right now. It's funny how that came out. But if you've got very specific problems like depression or a consistent pattern that's plagued you all your life, then you're going to need more than generic metaphors to work with that. And I've developed the whole therapeutic process of 8 sessions. And you will come to me, and I'm going to tape you for 30 minutes. I need a good 30 minutes to get a really good look at your unconscious and what's causing this behavior. And the unconscious will tell me. One 30-minute recording will tell me why it's there. Then I discuss results with the client, and that's always a very interesting session, to say the least. It creates changes in and of itself, hearing your own reversals. Then I do another session where I'm going to ask the unconscious, well, how do we fix this pattern? What do we do to change it? And the unconscious, which knows all, tells me what to do. Now, it tells me in pictures or metaphor. And so then I take my clients on a guided journey through the unconscious. I call them a meta walk. It's a combination of 2 words, meta for metaphor, and walkabout, which is obviously from my Australian heritage. The Australian Aboriginals go on their walkabouts into the desert. So a meta walk is a spiritual journey through the metaphors of the unconscious. That's how I got the name. So then I'll take my clients through a specific metaphor designed specifically for them, like it's tailor-made. And generally we'll get success. Sometimes I have to go into a second round, but generally I'll get success. We are asking the unconscious to change the way it functions and operates, but we're doing that with the language of the unconscious. So it creates a very powerful state and very powerful changes. And so what can I say? That's what it is.
Yeah, that's neat. And do you ever add any type of binaural beats or anything underneath the actual tracks too?
In the generic meta walks, I've got background music, but when I'm giving them live to my clients, no, there's no background. It's just purely by my tone of voice.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. And if we could also, I think that our audience here at Leak Project would just love to hear some of the stuff that you've done, the analysis on the politicians. And I know there were some things you shared previously, and then the Skype gremlins kicked in, so maybe we could do that again.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in addition to my very, very busy practice, I also managed to get some time out to follow politicians. And the great thing about reverse speech is it's going to tell us what's really on their mind, what their agenda is, who they really are. And I followed the election campaign very closely. Excuse me, sorry about that. Presenting my findings on the regular radio shows as well as my own show, which I do every Friday afternoon. So let's play a couple of examples of reverse speech on politicians, and this will also give you an idea what reverse speech is all about. And we're going to start off with Hillary Clinton, okay? So here she is having a go at Donald Trump.
And you know what? It also matters when he makes fun of people with disabilities. Calls women pigs.
Okay, now I've isolated a small section of this. I'm going to play it backwards at 3 different speeds. See if you can hear us say, "And I'll scam you."
And I'll scam you.
And I'll scam you. And I'll scam you.
And so you know I'm not pulling any tricks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play the whole
Hair's standing
track.
up on the back of my neck. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay. That's what we call an incongruent reversal. She doesn't really believe in what she's saying. She's just saying it for political purposes, and she's pulling a con. That's what reversal means. But here, I'm going to play the whole track backwards and see if you can hear how it appears amongst the gibberish. So here we go.
Yeah, it was all. See, the said there will be, and I'll scam you, sir. I am sorry.
Do you hear that jump out of the gibberish there? I'll do that again.
The said there will be, and I'll scam you, sir. I am sorry.
And that's how reverse speech works. Run any section of speech backwards, and once every 20, 30 seconds, you're going to hear these very clear phrases like that pop up out of the gibberish. And it's who you really are, the real you, what you're thinking and feeling, both conscious as well as unconscious. Now, let's look at Donald Trump as a comparison. Donald Trump was very congruent through the election campaign. Now, that's actually changed since he's been in office, and I'm not too sure why yet. I need some more reversals to find out. But let's look at one of Trump's congruent reversals. And here he is talking about Hillary Clinton's email scandal.
When he gave up that email thing, he said, "Here, Hillary." And you know what? That was orchestrated by the Democratic Party.
And we run this in reverse, and he says, Hillary, let's see this email.
Hillary, let's see this email.
Hillary, let's see this email.
And once more.
Hillary, let's see this email.
So that's what we call a congruent reversal. He uses the word Hillary and email in reverse. He uses them in forwards as well, so it's using the same words backwards as it is forwards. And he's communicating the same message. He wants to see Hillary's emails. And once again, let's play the whole lot backwards and see if you can hear it amongst the gibberish. Here we go.
Somebody said, yeah, there's no one in that. Hillary, let's see the email. Why me? That's my bag.
You hear how that jumps up out of the gibberish there? I'll do it again.
No one in that. Hillary, let's see the email. Why me? That's my bag.
And there it is. That's how reverse speech occurs. Okay, once every 20, 30 seconds. This very clear phrase amongst the gibberish. It's a dual form of human communication. What the fundamentalist Christians were finding in rock and roll music, calling it the work of the devil, was really the first sign of this dual communication process. And not understanding what it was, as humans generally do, we attribute it to Satan. So what else is new? So that's so there's a couple of very simple examples of reverse speech. One is incongruent and the other one is congruent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And so you do this a lot. I mean, you're getting on to the C-SPAN and different channels where you've got these political leaders giving their speeches, and then you'll take that, break it down, dissect it, reverse it, and come up with an analysis.
Correct. I do it a lot. I also have staff working for me who do it too. So it's not just all mine. I mean, I wouldn't have time to do all the work necessary to find all the current stuff. So I have people doing it for me. I do some, and I have people doing it for me too. And we dissect them down. We get them off of YouTube or C-SPAN. Whitehouse.gov used to save audios of speeches on their website, but they're not anymore. They've just got transcripts. I haven't been able to find any audio, so I don't know what's happened to whitehouse.gov. But anyway, we're on top of it, and I go on various radio shows and present all of the latest findings.
Yeah, that's neat. Now, so you've been doing this for, I guess, 24 years now. And
34. 34.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
what has scared you the most out of all the, if you can think just off the top of your head, the most frightening reverse speech analysis, what was it and when?
Ooh, gee, that's interesting. I think I was frightened more back in my early days before I knew what it was. It used to freak me out back then. And back in my early days, I remember a reversal I found on AC/DC's a song called "The Night Stalker," which inspired Richard Ramirez to commit his crimes back in the 70s and 80s. And it was a really spooky reversal, and said, "Listen to me, I'm from hell, I am Lucifer." Reversals like that really freaked me out. But AC/DC make no apologies about the violent, satanic, occultic nature of their music forwards anyway. So to hear something like that in reverse is not surprising. But I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Paul, please. I was just going to ask, because does this make you more religious? I mean, does this make you think that when somebody says something like that in reverse speech, is it just because that's what their mind is thinking, or do you think that it could actually be demonic influences and stuff like that?
No, I don't believe in demonic influences. So that's the belief system I operate from. No, I think they're all metaphors. I don't believe there's an actual person of Satan or Lucifer.
And David, would you explain metaphors exactly? When I first started with you, I wasn't that sure of the meaning of that word.
Oh, right. Oh, well, a metaphor is an analogy. In its simplest version, I mean, we use metaphors in forward speech. Like someone says, "He stabbed me in the back." That's a metaphor. It doesn't mean he literally got a knife and stabbed you in the back. But that phrase communicates the emotions behind that act of betrayal. He stabbed me in the back. And the unconscious thinks in pictures or metaphor. And they are words or pictures that encompass a whole variety of emotions. Like wolf is a very common metaphor in reverse speech. I find that on practically every tape I do. And the wolf symbolizes drive, motivation, stamina, strength. And so, but they are more than just words or pictures. They are actually life, even in of themselves. They have power, and the way they operate with other metaphors in the unconscious is what creates behaviour. So has it made me more or less religious? I'm not too sure how to answer that question. I'm a minister's son. So I grew up in the church, so I still have my basic Christian faith, which was with me with childhood. But I don't think that influences the work I do. I think the unconscious is very spiritual. I think that there are many times in reverse speech where we can hear the voice of our spirit speaking. Actually, I've got a wonderful example that would illustrate that. Let me bring that up real quick. This is such a classic reversal. This is a guy who's talking to his tape player, and he's got money problems, and he's looking for answers. So here's the forwards.
Does it further for us to put more energy and money and effort?
And this reversal says, "You're frightened, lean on me."
You're frightened, lean on me.
You're frightened, lean on me.
And see, that's his spirit talking to him and saying, "Look, I know you're frightened. I know you're upset. Just lean on me. Trust in me." And many reversals are the voice of the spirit speaking to the conscious mind. We call it the small, still voice. I mean, people do meditation trying to get in contact with that voice inside. There's so many disciplines out there that teach us how to get in contact with that voice. Well, with reverse speech, you can actually hear it. Hear it in straightforward English. You don't have to do any complicated meditations or guesswork or get to any particular state. Just run a tape backwards and bang, there it is, the voice of your spirit. So in that sense, it's maybe more spiritual, and as I believe in the spirit more. I have my faith in God, but I don't believe in demons or anything like that as an actual entity, no.
Sure, and I appreciate that, and I like how you separate the two. You separate your faith from your work, and I think that's good. That's important. And also, though, I would think that, let's say somebody is in a house or a location that might be, like some paranormal activity. maybe there's some spirits that are lingering there or something like that. Or maybe there are poltergeists. Or I certainly do think there are. I don't know what my definition of a demon is, but I do think that there's forces out there that are very dark and very dense. I actually, just real quick, I had a copy of Lesser Keys of Solomon, the 72 Lesser Keys of Solomon that I had back in the day that when I was researching this kind of stuff, and it was a used copy from like 1913. Well, that was a big mistake to buy a used Goetia. That was not a. I get it at my house, and my roommate at the time had no idea that I even had this book, and I had it in my house for a few weeks, and I finally had to get rid of it because the energy was just so dense. But literally the day that I got rid of that book, my roommate goes, "Man, does it feel different around here? The energy just feels lighter." And you could literally feel a difference. So maybe those forces, whatever they are, I mean, maybe not your typical what somebody would think of with horns and red dancing around with a tail or something like that, but maybe if you're in an area that has got paranormal activity and they find a way to kind of influence your verbiage and you play that back in reverse, I wonder if there's times or cases that are very similar to the Stairway to Heaven song.
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about EVPs?
Not EVP. I would like to get into that. More so stuff that's like you're talking what you say because of the area that you're in.
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. Well, you'll get quite dark reversals. Boy, yeah, I've got some very dark reversals. Satan rules my soul, and Satan has raped the divine. There's just some reverse I can think of at the top of my head I've found on clients. So, yeah, reverse speech can get pretty dark and pretty nasty. Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear. We have David Oates and Jay Wilder with us from reversespeech.weebly.com. Now, we're going to dive deep into the analysis of reverse speech. I have been studying this off and on now for about 10 years. I used to get into it pretty deep. I'm sure most of you have heard Stairway to Heaven backwards and also some of the Beatles songs. So we're going to find out what it really means and if it's actually legit. So thank you so much for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. How the heck are you guys?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Rex.
Absolutely. And the audio is so much better now. Now let's get into this. We'll just dive right in. Why is reverse speech so important, and why does it work?
Oh, right. Let's dive right in. Okay, well, reverse speech is so important because it gives us direct access to the unconscious. The human psyche is comprised of many different layers, consciousness being only the top 5% of the human psyche. 95% of the mind is virtually unconscious and largely unexplored. What reverse speech is, it is this unexplored region of the words in English to understand. So that's why it's so important, and it can teach us about who we are, why we create the things that we create, why we have the behavioural patterns we have, what causes us to live in the world in which we live. All of these secrets are contained within the unconscious. So what it actually is a dual-fold form of human communication. My theory is that language is bi-level, forwards as well as backwards. And as the brain is constructing the sounds of speech, it's putting those sounds together in such a way that we're saying two things at once. One forwards from the conscious and the other one conscious speaking. And it is speaking constantly. And it's speaking in reverse. And if you take speech and run it backwards about once every 20, 30 seconds, you can hear these very clear phrases amongst the gibberish. I'll be playing examples as this show continues. That is the voice of the unconscious. So it's important, very important, because other than hypnosis, we have not yet had a reliable access into the unconscious mind. We've fiddled around with NLP, other modalities, attempt to access the unconscious, but this is the first real direct communication with the unconscious that has been established in normal, straightforward work in reverse from the unconscious. So it's a natural form of language. It's been surrounded with suspicion and superstition for decades. Religious fundamentalists called it the voice of Satan. It's had all sorts of interesting history over the years, but it's essentially another form of communication, the unconscious mind speaking. That's why it's so important.
Now, is it true that the subconscious mind actually picks things up in reverse first?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is. Yes, a reverse speech generally precedes forward speech. You'll often hear things in reverse, spoken in reverse before they're spoken forward. So the